Michael Nugent, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon.
Michael, will you talk to me about what it is that you have a problem with about the way the Annunciation is being taught in our national schools?
Yes, well, when you say national schools, they're schools that are funded by the state, but they're in effect run by the Catholic Church. And they have a religious instruction course that teaches infants about the Annunciation, is their story that God made Mary pregnant.
When you say infants now, you mean senior infants, you don't mean literal infants. We're talking about six-year-olds.
Exactly, junior and senior infant classes, which would be 6 and 7 year olds. They have a new course on religious instruction called Grow in Love, and in that they portray Mary as a little girl in the picture. There's a picture that's displayed in the classrooms as a poster and as part of the children's school books for it. Mary, she's sitting on her bed, she's looking startled. It's night time. There's a little kitten with a heart on it beside her on the floor, and the angel Gabriel comes to her. The teachers are told to teach the children that Mary is confused and afraid, doesn't know what's happening, but that she still says yes to becoming pregnant, even though she's afraid and confused. And we think that's a dangerous message to send to children. The Dublin Rape Crisis Centre agrees with us that it's a dangerous message to send to children. Countless parents have contacted Atheist Ireland about it since we inform people about how this is portrayed. And we just think that it's something that the Catholic Church of all organisations should know, that we have higher standards of child protection today than were common when that story was first to 2,000 years ago.
So you think that there is a subtext here that some children might be at risk of picking up on, which is when something doesn't feel right, you should do what the authority figure tells you to do?
Yeah, well, that's what it says. Even though you're afraid and confused, that you should do, you should trust somebody who's effectively in the story, a stranger that comes to your bedroom at night. Ellen O'Malley Dunlop, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, described it as saying that type of language could be linked in with feelings that children who are victims of sexual abuse have, that they don't know what's happening to them. And she also says that it's particularly worrying in light of the reports published over the last 10 years, especially when coupled with images of Mary looking so young.
Reverend Chris Hayden, you wrote a piece in the Irish Times in response to Atheist Ireland's problems here, in which you accused them of staggering mendacity. Why?
Hello, Philip. How are you?
How are you?
Hello, Michael. I think that language was not inappropriate, because what Michael has been talking about there is, it's really a recasting of the story of the Annunciation in the light of other stories. And to be perfectly frank, I think a child would have to be thoroughly coached, to hear it in the way that it's been described, because it's a story in which God, acting through the angel Gabriel, invites Mary to be part of his plan to bless the world. And in the telling of that story, you can see the overcoming of anxiety. So it's putting out the idea that it's teaching that anxiety can be overcome. To take it as a bare bones of a stranger appearing in the bedroom, insisting that a child is going to become pregnant, that's warped beyond belief. That simply isn't what the story is about. It's not how it's been taught by Catholicism since Christianity began, and it's certainly not what sane and sensible adult teachers are teaching in their classrooms.
Is it really about helping somebody overcome an anxiety, though? Because the bones of it are pretty blunt. Why me? Why am I being chosen for this? Just because you are? Oh, okay, fine, I'll go along with it then.
Well,
it's not much more evolved than that, is it?
Actually, it is, and it's more subtle than that. I mean, for a start, it's not a stranger appearing in a room. We're told, and this is the story, okay? I realise that not all listeners are going to subscribe to it, but the story as it is, it's not a stranger. It's someone who's already been introduced, who's already familiar in the gospel. It's the angel Gabriel sent to bring an announcement from God. And there's a very respectful greeting. Greetings, you who are highly favoured. The Lord is with you. Now, you don't get that kind of introduction every day, so we're told, yes, that Mary was troubled. Now, she was troubled before any mention of becoming the mother of Jesus, and I think that's an important detail here. Mary was troubled at the angel's approach, and she enters into conversation, and it is resolved in favour of trust. Now, how you can construe that as putting children at risk, I don't think that you can do it in a way that's in keeping with the story itself. I simply don't believe that, and that's why I felt free to use the term staggering mendacity.
Michael, you are putting an entirely inappropriate construction on a message that is a fairly fundamental, intrinsic part of teaching the Christian message in schools.
Well, Chris suggests that we've engaged in staggering mendacity, which is a polite way of saying that we're not telling the truth. Now, if he's concerned about our portrayal of the story, all that we're doing is describing the portrayal of the story in the children's religious education book and in the teacher's instructions for the religious education book and in the poster that is included in that book. It's not us that's making it up. That's the Catholic Church, approved by the Vatican, have produced this documentation. The book also says that there should be a prayer table in the classroom with a Bible on it open at Luke 1 for this lesson. So if the children read that Bible, and some of them will be able to read it at that stage, that book, in fact, in that the confused Mary asks Gabriel, how is it that she can have a child that she's a virgin? And Gabriel tells her the Holy Spirit will come on her, and she's still concerned about it, but goes ahead with it.
Well, twice she expresses concerns. I mean, we just remind ourselves of this. She says, and this is directly from Luke, but she was greatly troubled at the saying and cast in her mind what manner of salutation this might be. And the angel said unto her, fear not, Mary, for thou hast found favour with God. He goes on to announce that there is a child in thy womb, and she says, how shall this be, seeing I know not a man? And the angel answered and said unto her, the Holy Spirit shall come upon thee, and power of the Most High shall overshadow thee. So her objections and her confusion are writ large right throughout this.
They are, and not only are they writ large throughout it, it's something that I understand Chris doesn't see the danger in it. But Chris is from the Diocese of Ferns, and the Ferns report has shown that the Catholic Church in that diocese and elsewhere didn't understand the impact of child abuse, and it's quite possible maybe, Chris, that Chris doesn't understand the impact.
Tarring Chris with association with Ferns and the Ferns report is unfair, Michael, really.
No, with the lack of understanding of the Catholic Church of the impact of child abuse.
Chris?
Hello? Yeah. I mean, I'd like to get in there, Philip. Really, that point is, and as you rightly put it, that's tarring now. That's really, I mean, okay, I'm assuming that Michael doesn't have too much experience of dealing with, classes of senior infants. Leaving a Bible open as a symbolic thing is a very, very long way from expecting that children in senior infants or junior infants are going to be reading the text and mulling over it in an adult way. That is simply not the case. And I think really what I would suggest to Michael is that you would need to coach small children and coach them very carefully to hear the story in the way that he is spinning it. And he's mentioned twice now the idea, the poster that has a small child on it. Well, look, it's in the idiom of children's textbooks for small children. It's the graphic idiom that the adult characters are presented as children. That seems to be the normal way that it's done. So I don't think we can or should get away from the fact that really a small child is not going to read this alone, and is certainly not in the context of religious instruction in the classroom with a sane, vetted teacher. And let's not dumb down teachers on their approach. They're highly trained. They're well able to do their job. A small child in that atmosphere is simply not picking up on all of these things that Michael seems so determined to introduce into the narrative.
Michael, you are introducing these things into the narrative, as Chris says, as part of driving a wider agenda.
Well, first of all, I'm not introducing it. The documentation was put together by the Catholic Church. Parents are concerned about it.
How many parents have expressed concern to you?
We have had dozens of parents contacting us about it, and we have also had the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre expressing concern about it. And typically in these issues, the amount of parents that contact us directly about it is only a small proportion of the amount of parents that are concerned about it. But you're right about the wider agenda, and the wider agenda is that the Catholic Church runs state-funded schools for the purpose of evangelisation as part of the mission of the Church. And
I'm very happy to talk about that wider agenda with Michael.
Yeah, and we'll come to it.
Whereas that is quite legitimate for Catholic parents to want to have their children brought up in that particular faith, in practice, parents of other children who are forced to attend Catholic schools because it is their only local publicly funded school are also exposed to this information. And even if they formally opt their child out from the formal religious instruction classes, the religious ethos is still spread throughout the entire curriculum because of Rule 68 of the Rules for National Schools.
And we'll come to Rule 68 in a moment, but let's just wrap up this enunciation thing first.
Sure, yeah.
Chris, you will have to acknowledge, Chris, that when you have a body with the authority of the Rape Crisis Network who are dealing at the front line with children who have been groomed, the messages that they have received and have acted unfortunately on, you have to take cognizance of that, don't you? It's incumbent on you to say, well, God, you know what? Maybe they have a point, and we don't, for instance, teach senior and junior infants about God telling Abraham to slay his son, do we? We presumably leave that to children of a slightly more mature age before we introduce it to them. Maybe the enunciation isn't appropriate for 5- and 6-year-old kids.
I believe that we should take cognizance of anything that the Rape Crisis Centre can teach us. I'm absolutely in agreement with you there. However, I do not believe, and I'll say it again, I do not believe that the story of the Annunciation in and of itself, without the selective emphasis that we've been hearing, that story is not harmful. And underlying the point that Michael's been making, and like-minded people, underlying the starting point is not the story of the Annunciation is harmful to children. The starting point is religion is harmful to children. And the story of the Annunciation...
But the story of the Annunciation, Luke 1 verse 29, but she was greatly troubled at the saying.
Yeah.
And it goes on then to have her say, well, I am the handmaid of the Lord, do it unto me.
She asks how this can be, and she enters into a dialogue, and the dialogue is resolved in favour of trust. And that, in some contexts, that is a very, very good thing. And that is not being taught, even the way you're presenting it there, Phil. It simply isn't taught to children in that vein.
Yeah.
You can take virtually any story and make it serve a particular point. And that's
what matters then, Michael, is, and it's a fair point. It's a fair point that Chris is making. Is what matters is what way kids are being taught this by their teachers in their classroom, and there is no teacher on the face of the planet who is going to try and inspire fear in their children. Are they?
Well, that's the whole point that we're making, is that this is the guidelines as to how to teach it that are published for teachers. It tells teachers to tell children that Mary was troubled and afraid and still did what she was told to do.
Look, part of education in these times is acknowledging that being in trouble or being afraid, that there are places to turn, not simply masking over the possibility of being in trouble or being in fear.
But the place to turn is presumably to your parents or to somebody like that, not to a stranger that comes into your bedroom at night, which is how it is portrayed in this book. Not my story, but how it is portrayed in this children's religious book published by the Catholic Church.
I think it's over-interpretation beyond words, Michael, to say that this is portrayed.
I'm just describing it. I'm not interpreting it at all. I'm just describing it.
No. The story of the Annunciation is what's at issue here, and it's not about a stranger coming into a bedroom at night.
It is in this book. It is in this children's education book.
We must be looking at something different. Look,
we're not looking at something different, because I know that you've seen the picture because it's in the article.
I have, of course, yes, I have seen the picture.
Well, then you will see that it is. She's sitting in her bed, she's a child sitting in her bed, and there are other characters in that book that are portrayed as adults with adult characteristics in the pictures. This girl is portrayed as a child, she's sitting in her bed, she has a kitten by her side, and this stranger comes into her room.
Well, I have to say, Michael, I find it gravely. It concerns me gravely that you project such adult concerns onto small children.
You should perhaps consider doing that as well, and then you might be more aware of the dangers that are involved in not understanding those nuances.
Well, I think once again that's an example of spin, and it's a completely self-serving interpretation of what I've just said.
Can I broaden the conversation here to the place of religion in schools overall? Chris, are you in favour of keeping baptismal requirements for entry to national schools?
Well, first of all, according to if you were to listen to a lot of the recent discussion, you would think that we had a sign up saying non-Catholics need not apply. I have to say, in my own work, and I've dealt with quite a few schools, I've yet to have dealings with any school that does not have children who are not Roman Catholic. the discussion is so fixated on the baptismal cert, it's become a symbol now rather than something that reflects what actually happens.
Yeah, but you can't dispute that there are. You can't dispute, though, Chris, can you, that there are very many schools in which children would have liked to have gone, but they couldn't get in because they were oversubscribed, and those who had been baptised were favoured ahead of them.
Yes, and equally there are schools where baptised children can't be admitted because the children there's already a child of a non-faith family in the school, and they bring a non-faith sibling along to get into the school, and they're further up the order as far as the enrolment policy goes than a child of a Roman Catholic family. It's really much greyer than the black and white take on it that's been presented lately.
Michael Nugent,
it's really not as simple.
Would you accept that, Michael, that geography and siblings and other criteria do come into play?
Well, they don't, unfortunately. I mean, they should. It should be geography. Should be the issue, and siblings is also another reasonable criteria, I think, just for practical purposes for parents. But what happens in Ireland is that most schools are, over 90% of schools are run by the Roman Catholic Church, funded by the state. Most of the others are run by other religious groups, funded by the state. And there are 4 areas that this causes problems in. One is the issue of patronage, which denies children the right to a critical and pluralistic and inclusive education. The second is access, which is that if the schools are oversubscribed, they have a Catholic first policy that is enshrined in our equality laws. The third is curriculum, which, and this is part of it that we're talking about here, but that the curriculum isn't delivered in an objective, critical and pluralist way. And the fourth is teachers, and teachers are also discriminated against on the ground of religion. In fact, there's a bill going through the Oireachtas today reinforcing the right to discriminate against teachers on the ground of religion. Mm-hmm. And so those 4 areas, patronage, access, curriculum and teaching, Atheist Ireland calls that the schools pact. Those are the PACT for those things. They're the 4 areas that need to be changed to bring about a system that's inclusive of everybody. And I should really stress, we would be as opposed to state-funded schools promoting atheism as we are to state-funded schools promoting religion. State-funded schools should be for everybody equally, regardless of their religious or non-religious beliefs.
Chris, would you have a problem with that?
I would not. I think plurality of patronage is a good thing, but not because Roman Catholic patronage or ethos are a bad thing. They're quite an excellent thing, and that's recognised worldwide. But I do think there are 2 very good reasons, at least 2 very good reasons for diversity of patronage. First of all, it would better suit families who don't want a denominational schooling for their children. And secondly, it would make, and this applies across the board in terms of religious ethos, it would make Roman Catholic and other religious ethos schools a more deliberate, intentional option. So I'm very much in favour of a growing plurality of patronage. Now,
but with 90% of schools currently still under the patronage of the Catholic Church, it's going to be a long time before that happens. Do you think, just as a point of principle, I'm not asking you to solve the problem of patronage with the click of a fingers, but as a point of principle, do you think that it's right that one club, one group gets to impose its ethos, its morality with everybody else's money?
No, if it were that, in fact, I wouldn't.
And is it not that?
The idea, no, it's not, of course. I mean, Catholic ethos is not. It's not something being imposed, being forced down anyone's throat. It's actually quite an inclusive. It's a very inclusive ethos. I mean, I'd have to take issue with the underlying philosophical points that Michael is raising about critical education and so forth. And I know it's part of a fundamental worldview that you can't be a person of faith and have a critical intelligence at the same time. That is simply false and demonstrably so.
All right, well, let me
and that has its own ethos behind it as well.
Let me put it to you another way then, Chris, because Michael referred earlier on there to Section 68 of the Department of Education's guidelines for schools. And if you were to just take the Roman Catholic out of it and substitute Sharia, it would be something that nobody in this country would be able to accept. I'm not going to read all of it, I'll just read the first few lines. Of all the parts of a school curriculum, religious instruction is by far the most important, as its subject matter, God's honour and service, includes the proper use of all man's faculties and affords the most powerful inducement to their proper use, and so on about God's law and respect for the ordinance of lawful authority which God and revelation impose on mankind, and so on and so on and so on. Now, that document, I think it was 1968, or no, sorry, maybe even before that, does that have any place in the education system in 2015?
I don't think that. I think if that were changed, I don't think it wouldn't change the idea of a Catholic ethos. I don't know. Look, to be perfectly frank with you, Philip, it's not my area, but I don't think that a Catholic ethos would depend on that sort of buttressing from an instrument of the state. I think there has to be freedom. See, the point is that the Catholic ethos, Michael would obviously stand over and defend whatever educational ethos he proposes, and would do so, I'm assuming, point by point. The same defence can be done point by point for the Catholic ethos. It's not some sort of wild thing. It can be rationally argued point by point as the basis of a critical education, which is how it pans out in practice. We're not turning out clones or automatons. We're turning out children who are able to think for themselves. Now, I know that's not the way it's presented and understood everywhere, quite obviously, or we wouldn't be having this conversation, but it can be. And if you want to present alternative ethos, don't presume, don't, for example, compare your finest ideals with someone else's basest conduct, which is what Atheist Ireland tend to do.
Well, let's put that point to Michael then, because the proof ultimately, as Chris says, is in the pudding. The education system is not turning out year after year of little Catholic jihadi drones and automatons. They're rational, fully formed, self-deciding, sentient young people.
Well, if they're not producing good Catholics, then they're not serving the purpose that the Catholic Church runs the schools for. Catholic Church says that its purpose for being in education is part of the mission of the Catholic Church. And in terms of the
but you're Michael, you're being a little bit clever with that. They're not turning out Catholic drones. They're not turning out automatons.
So your argument is that they're not as good as they would like to be at indoctrinating.
Nonsense, Michael.
No, it's not nonsense at all. If you go back to Rule 68, the final part of that sentence that you read out there is that religious instruction is a fundamental part of the school course, and a religious spirit should inform and vivify the whole work of the school. And so that's the context in which the Catholic ethos spreads throughout the entire curriculum. And what Chris said earlier there, which I think is quite significant, and I agree with him that is what the Catholic Church is trying to do, is what they're saying in terms of diversity is they will trade off divesting some schools to which in practice they don't have the resources run anyway, to other groups such as, for example, Educate Together. But in return for having a stronger Catholic ethos in the schools that they retain. Now, over half of the schools in the country are what the Forum on Patronage calls standalone schools, which are schools that are the only school in a particular area, so they're not going to be divested. So in practical terms, even with the maximum divestment that's envisaged under the government's programme, most secular parents would still be in a position where not only do they not have access to secular schools, but their local state-funded school has an even stronger Catholic ethos.
Okay, very good point, Michael, very good point. But just before I take an ad break, come back to that one question. Is the education system, or is it not, turning out young, critical thinking, forward-looking people who are not infused with Roman Catholicism and the prejudices that you say that brings?
I think it is less a danger than it was before, because the world generally is becoming more secular, but the Catholic Church is still trying to do that, even if they're not succeeding as they have done in the past.
Okay.
Talk to Joe on 1850 715 815.